Every person who ever walked into that yard and offered her a treat gave her the same thing you did. She didn't choose them. She chose you. And the reason has almost nothing to do with who brought the food. There's a slow, precise social evaluation that runs across hundreds of ordinary interactions before a chicken's preference for a specific person becomes visible. One most keepers never realize was happening while it was happening to them. If you think her preference for you is about the treats, wait until you find out what she was actually measuring, and which moments, more than any others, likely decided it. So what was she actually evaluating during all those early interactions before her preference became obvious? Why can two people hold her the exact same way and only one of them actually be trusted? And what does it mean when that established preference starts to shift? If your chicken chose you as her favorite person, do you actually know why it happened? Yes, it feels special, but behind that preference she shows for you over every other human who enters that yard, there's something most backyard keepers never fully understand. It's one of the most deliberate social decisions a chicken makes, built over time through a process far more sophisticated than most people give her credit for. And if you've been assuming it's just because you're the one who brings the food, which most people do, you've been underselling what she actually did when she chose you. Let's start with what that choice really was. It was never just about the treats. Most people assume it's simple. You feed her, she associates you with food. Preference follows automatically. But here's the thing. Every person who has ever entered your yard and offered your hen a treat has offered her the same basic resource you do. If food association were the whole explanation, she'd show roughly equal preference for anyone who fed her consistently. She doesn't. She shows preference for you, and that specificity survives even on the days you arrive empty-handed. Because food is one input in a much more complex evaluation system. Chickens are capable of forming what researchers describe as selective social bonds, preferences for specific individuals that go beyond resource association and reflect accumulated assessment of a particular individual's predictability, safety, and social value. What your hen built with you wasn't a food-triggered response. It was a relationship, assembled piece by piece from every interaction you've had, evaluated against criteria her social cognition was specifically designed to assess. Research published in Animal Cognition has documented that domestic chickens form individual preferences for specific humans that persist independently of immediate food reward, suggesting that the bond reflects genuine social recognition and preference, rather than simple conditioned association. When your hen chose you, she was doing something that her species is specifically equipped to do. She just did it about you. And by the way, if you've ever wondered whether she actually knows the difference between you and someone who looks or sounds similar, the answer to that is more interesting than you'd expect. We'll get into it before the end. She built a profile of you before she committed. Have you thought about how long it actually took before her preference for you became obvious? That timeline wasn't accidental. It reflects a real evaluation process that was running before the preference was visible. Here's what most people don't realize. Chickens are continuous environmental assessors. Every individual they encounter regularly gets evaluated across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Movement patterns, vocal qualities, behavioral predictability, how interactions with that person have historically ended, whether the person moves in ways that trigger alarm responses or ways that read as non-threatening. This evaluation doesn't produce an instant result. It accumulates. Studies in human-animal interaction science have found that the development of a clear individual preference in domestic fowl for a specific human handler typically requires a period of repeated, consistent, positive exposure, with the preference strengthening over time as the accumulated experience of that individual deepens. What looked like a gradual warming up on your hen's part was actually a data collection process. She was building a profile of you, cross-referencing each new interaction against what she already had, and updating her assessment accordingly. The moment her preference became visible to you was simply the moment it crossed a threshold. The work had been happening long before that. Your movement patterns were part of what she evaluated. Does she seem more relaxed around you specifically during your normal daily movements through the yard, compared to when you move quickly, unexpectedly, or differently than usual? That sensitivity to your movement isn't random. It was one of the primary dimensions she used to evaluate you in the first place. Chickens, as prey animals with laterally positioned eyes designed for wide-angle threat detection, are acutely sensitive to movement. Fast, unpredictable movement reads as threat. Slow, predictable movement reads as neutral or safe. Over time, a person whose movement through the yard is consistently calm and predictable accumulates a different kind of assessment than a person whose presence is associated with sudden sounds, rapid approach, or irregular behavior. Research in poultry handling and human-animal relationships has found that movement speed and predictability during human-chicken interactions are among the most significant factors influencing stress response and subsequent preference formation in domestic hens. The way you naturally move through your yard, the pace you use, the way you approach her, whether you crouch to her level or loom overhead, all of these were being read and recorded from the very beginning. Your preferred status wasn't granted, it was earned. Largely through body language you may not have been consciously managing. And if this is changing how you think about what she actually noticed during those early interactions, hit that like and subscribe. It helps us reach more keepers who want to understand the real depth of what their hens are capable of. Your voice was part of the selection criteria. Have you noticed she responds to your voice specifically, orienting toward you or vocalizing in response when you call to her in a way she doesn't show for other voices? That's not a trained behavior in the conventional sense. It's individual recognition built through acoustic familiarity. Chickens, like many birds, are capable of individual vocal recognition, distinguishing specific individuals by the acoustic characteristics of their voice, rather than simply responding to human sound as a category. Research into auditory recognition in domestic fowl has found that hens can distinguish between familiar and unfamiliar human voices and show differential behavioral responses to each, with familiar voices producing calmer, more oriented responses, and unfamiliar voices triggering more alert or avoidant reactions. Your hen hasn't just learned what humans sound like, she's learned what you sound like specifically. Your pitch, your rhythm, the particular way your voice sounds when you're calling to her versus talking to someone else nearby. That acoustic profile has been part of her representation of you since early in your relationship, and it's one of the recognition channels she uses to identify you even when she hasn't seen you yet. She recognized your face individually, and that matters. Does she seem to distinguish you from other people, even when you're wearing different clothing or standing at an unusual angle or in different lighting than usual? That robustness and recognition across varying conditions isn't what you'd expect if she were simply recognizing a color or a silhouette. Research into facial recognition in domestic chickens has demonstrated that hens can distinguish between individual human faces, and some studies have found this recognition is robust enough to survive changes in appearance, such as altered hat styles, different clothing, and modified facial features in experimental conditions. This places chickens in a category of animals with genuine facial recognition capability, a finding that was unexpected to many researchers when it was first documented, and has since been replicated across multiple study designs. What this means practically is that when your hen orients toward you across the yard, she's not just reading a familiar color palette or a general human silhouette. She's recognizing your face as an individual face, distinct from other faces, associated through accumulated experience with everything that relationship has meant to her. That is a different cognitive operation than conditioned food response, and it's what makes the preference she shows you genuinely personal rather than simply situational. What you did during the hard moments shaped the bond most. Think back to any time your hen was stressed, sick, or in a situation that required you to handle her in a way she found difficult. How those moments went may have done more to shape her preference for you than any number of easy, comfortable interactions. Here's something that might reframe how you think about those harder moments. Social bonds in animals, including the selective preferences domestic hens form for specific humans, are shaped disproportionately by how an individual behaves during high-stakes, high-stress interactions. A person who handles a hen during a frightening experience and does so in a way that is calm, predictable, and ends safely contributes a disproportionately strong positive data point to that hen's accumulated assessment of them. Research in animal-human bond formation has found that the quality and outcome of challenging interactions, illness handling, veterinary procedures, introduction of new birds often carry more weight in the formation of a strong individual preference than a larger number of routine positive interactions. This isn't unique to chickens. It reflects a broader principle of social bond formation in which how someone behaves when the stakes are highest carries the most information about whether they can be trusted at all. The moments you showed up for her when things were hard, even if you didn't know you were being evaluated, may be exactly the moments that decided it, what it means when that preference shifts. So what does it tell you when a hen who has clearly preferred you for an extended period begins showing less of that preference, seeking you out less, responding with less engagement when you arrive? This is what I set up at the beginning, and it's worth understanding as the flip side of everything described above. A shift in an established preference isn't a random mood change. The same social cognitive system that built the preference in the first place continues running, updating its assessment based on current inputs. If something in the current input stream is changed, the assessment can shift with it. Sometimes the cause is something that happened between you that you may not have registered as significant, but that read very differently to her. A handling incident that was more stressful than you realized. A change in your routine that's made your presence less predictable. A period of reduced interaction that has let the active assessment drift toward neutral. Sometimes the cause is entirely unrelated to you. A health issue suppressing social engagement broadly. A significant flock disruption consuming her attention. A life stage shift like a molt or the onset of a laying cycle that briefly changes her behavioral baseline. Research in animal social cognition consistently finds that individual preferences in social species are dynamic rather than fixed, maintained by ongoing positive interaction rather than permanently locked in by past experience. The preference she built for you is real and durable, but it's not a setting that gets switched on and never revisited. It's a living assessment, updated every time you walk into that yard. She chose you, not all at once, and not because it was inevitable. She chose you through a process that ran quietly across hundreds of interactions, evaluating your movements, your voice, your face, how you behaved when things were difficult, what being near you has consistently felt like. And at some point, the data was clear enough that the decision wasn't a decision anymore. It was simply the truth about who you were to her. That's not a small thing. It was never a small thing.